This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society. Everything you have done to take care of your heart was wrong. Today, we're going to be talking to Dr. Stephen Hussey, author of the book, Understanding the Heart, which covers a lot of misconceptions about heart health that in the standard medical community you would find to be true. Today, we're going to be talking about a lot of things that deal with your heart that have nothing to do with food. We're going to be talking about light, water, and magnetism, minding your mitochondria. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Decentralized Radio. This is my first ever, I believe, introduction of the show. Tristan has lent me the reins, and we are talking to a very exciting guest today, Dr. Stephen Hussey, who has a wonderful book called Understanding the Heart. It's actually one of the earlier books that I have read in the health space on my own journey. Tristan, how are you doing? You're in Wyoming, enjoying it? Got the shirt off? I love it.
This is a shirt, dude. It's just the color of my skin.
Sorry,
yeah.
My eyes are deceiving me.
No, I'm doing well. Yeah, excited for this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot we're going to be talking about that is not actually necessarily food-based. I'm sure we'll talk about some of that stuff for sure, because it's always exciting, but there's a lot more to it than just food when it comes to the heart, unlike what your cardiologist may be telling you. So, Stephen, I'd sort of love to begin by talking about a little bit of your background, your health story. You have a really good video on your Instagram page, which I'll link in the notes below, about your journey with atherosclerosis in your leg, actually, which is a cool story. But there's so much more to that. So I'd love to give you the floor for a little bit of your background and sort of why you got into the space and why you're here and why you do what you do.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, like most people, I guess that, find themselves immersed in this, my own personal health journey kind of pushed me toward, health and being passionate about health. And, I was a very inflamed child, I would say. I had a lot of inflammatory conditions, everything from asthma to I used to break out chronic hives, I had irritable bowel syndrome, stuff like that. And so ultimately ended up with autoimmune type 1 diabetes when I was 9 years old, just a result of that inflammation, where my body just reacting the way that it was. And so, my parents and I were just kind of thrown into the world of Western medicine and to manage these conditions and just kind of did what they said. And it wasn't until college that I figured out that the way I lived my life had a direct impact on my ability to manage these conditions. And, I can say that I've gotten rid of all of them aside from the type 1 diabetes, which is kind of, collateral damage from that inflammation. But yeah, so I thought that was interesting that, no doctor had ever told me that I could change my lifestyle and get rid of these conditions or manage them better or whatever. And so that kind of, inspired me to look further into this, and I became passionate about health and, eventually went and got a medical education as a chiropractor and a master's in functional medicine. But those things taught me some things, but they didn't really teach me that much to give me a good baseline education. But it's really been my study of things outside of formal education that have really given me the answers I was always looking for. And so since I'm heavily predisposed to heart disease as a type 1 diabetic, I've been very interested in the heart and just, everything I could learn about it. And so the thing about me is that I've always just been very curious and, I never ruled anything out. I wanted to read it. If it was information, even if it sounded crazy, I wanted to read it. And even if it didn't make sense to me then, I thought it was crazy then, it may make sense later when I read 3 other things, So it was just kind of a never-ending search for things. And I had all this information about the heart, and I started sharing it, and people seemed to like it. So I put it down to a book, and yeah, here we are. I have some interesting stories about heart disease and different things, but my information is, I'm not going to sit here and claim that it's the right thing to say or the correct opinion or whatever. It's contrary. A lot of it is contrary to, Western medicine's thoughts on cardiology and things. But I just want the truth. I've been looking for the truth and trying to find it about health my entire life. And the most important thing to do when looking for the truth is to have open, honest discussion about it. And and when you're seeking it. And so that's what the book is about. It's about different ideas and different explanations of the pathology, and say, hey, look at this information. Let's see if we can use it to actually find the truth. Maybe it is the truth, maybe it's not, but let's not close our minds off and think we have the truth. Let's keep looking for it.
Yeah, and it's a lot about, like you said, it's about having those conversations and being open-minded. I found that even within the functional space, there tends to be, I feel like maybe it's human nature, there tends to be sort of this draw to finding a certain perspective or a camp and then sort of squatting there for a while, whether that's carnivore camp, vegan camp, enable-based camp, or whatever, quantum health camp. And it's sort of, at the end of the day, I've come to the realization that it's sort of like all of these things, you can take little bits and pieces. And that's why I find these conversations with multiple guests like very valuable, because I don't think anyone has it figured out per se, but everyone has a different version or different knowledge to share. And it's evolved like throughout my journey as it has yours, I'm sure. And definitely with Tristan's, you probably don't remember, we had a conversation like over a year ago. And at that time, our conversation revolved a lot around food, animal-based diets, heart health, misconceptions about LDL, talking about CAC scores and all this different sort of metrics that people measure in a general conventional sense. But I'd love to sort of dive into a little bit of the more muddy waters, I guess, of things like water, sunlight, touch and dirt. Like, why are all these other aspects of environmental things important for heart health? I know we talked a lot about I was rewatching our discussion from over a year ago. We talked about stress and the stress impact on your arteries or heart. And there was a lot of mindset stuff with that. So we can probably dive into some of those things too. But what are some of the things that you explore in your book, or even since having written that you found more interesting to having impact on your heart that maybe isn't spoken about in the conventional, like, saturated fat causes to heart disease?
For sure. Yeah, when I started writing this book, I probably didn't realize it, but I was harping on this message that the idea or the theory behind heart disease has been so centered around diet because of this incorrect idea that saturated fat and cholesterol are the cause of heart disease, which was kind of, that idea was kind of developed back in the 50s and 60s. But because of that idea, the approach to preventing it was either, lowering cholesterol in your blood or changing your diet and eating a certain way. And so, while diet is important and metabolic health is important, there's so much more to health and so much more to heart disease is what I found. And so I didn't really realize it when I was writing, but I was really trying to open the conversation about it and bring it away from diet and toward the other aspects of what create this disease. And so, so we talk about sunlight. Light is incredibly important. And so, we get about a third of our energy in our bodies from food. So which means there's 2/3 that has to come from somewhere else. And if you look at things, if you zoom way back and you think about how the earth got energy in the first place, it was because there was light, there was sunlight coming to the earth. And so it would make sense that we absorb energy from the sun as well. And so, especially, there's lots of different, ways that your body would get energy, so to speak, from the sun. One is that you literally, because we are animals and we have the fatty acid DHA, we can literally take sunlight and turn it into electrons or electricity that drive the production of, cellular processes, drive the production of electron transport chains that make ATP. So there's that. There's also the fact that we are a large percentage water, and that water is not in the liquid state, or most of it's not in the liquid state, like the water in our cells and things. It's all in this gel state. It's in the fourth phase of water, so to speak. So water has the ability to structure itself onto biological surfaces or onto hydrophilic surfaces. Water-loving surfaces and biologic surfaces are hydrophilic. And so if the water is next to that surface and it has sufficient energy, then it can structure itself into this more gel-like state, which is, you think like Jell-O. And so that's pretty much what, the state of water in our entire body. And the number one way to energize that water and create that structured water is infrared light. There's different forms of energy that you can use to do that, but infrared is the most absorbed by water. And so that is, the original source of infrared is the sun. About 42% of the sun's rays are infrared. It's higher in the mornings and the evenings, that infrared light, which is why it's important to get out into morning light. So those are just different ways that light drives our physiology. But the other aspect of light, especially sunlight, that's really, really important, is how it triggers, or how it signals our circadian rhythm. So basically, our exposure to light is what tells your body what time it is, and what to do and when to do it, right? So if we're getting the wrong light signals, like we're getting indoor artificial lights at the wrong times, because it's not like those color temperatures of light are bad for us. They can be at the wrong times, though, and they can be when they're processed and they're not full spectrum, right? Because there's studies that show that blue light is very beneficial, but if we get mostly blue light and we get it at the wrong times, like when we're not supposed to be getting light at all, that's what triggers this alteration in our physiology. Our body's getting the wrong signals. It literally it doesn't know when to, digest. It doesn't know when to go to sleep, or even prepare for sleep. It doesn't know a lot of things. And that creates this imbalance in the circadian rhythm, which is very heavily associated with imbalance in the autonomic nervous system, which links us directly to quote unquote stress, and how the autonomic nervous system and heart rate variability, or poor heart rate or low heart rate variability, are heavily linked to poor health outcomes in general, but specifically poor outcomes with heart disease, or higher rates of heart disease. And so there's lots of different things that could imbalance your autonomic nervous system, but being out of sync with the day-night cycle, eating at the wrong times, exercising at the wrong times, so that your circadian rhythm, your body's not getting those, clock-like signals throughout the day, every day, definitely confuses things and creates this issue. So yeah, that's kind of a big kind of overview of all the different ways that light affects our physiology and how important it is. So it's like you could be eating the most perfect diet, but if you're living in the wrong light environment, your body doesn't know how to use that diet.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education.
Yeah, I think what I often like to say is it's kind of like the input signal to our biology. Like so many downstream, functions and systems are based off light signals, and we talk a lot about that. And basically everything you're describing, or a lot of it, goes back to the mitochondria, functioning optimally. And I think on your book, you break it down to like energizing the body, balancing the autonomic nervous system, which you just mentioned, reducing oxidative stress. And to me, those are like all like very holistic, views. So it's cool that you silo it down to the heart, and I want to get to that and how the mitochondria is, affecting the heart specifically. But in general, I want to talk a little bit about oxidative stress specifically, because I think this is something that people hear a lot about. They hear a lot about antioxidants, especially in like the food diet component. And, you talk and we talk here on the show quite a bit about endogenous antioxidants, or, grounding, things like that. So I'm curious, could you explain maybe a little bit how, oxidative stress kind of comes to fruition? And, there's an important factor and balance of like producing free radicals. That's just like a byproduct, right, of oxidative phosphorylation. So how do we actually want to understand this process, and when does it tip over to the oxidative stress, part of the equation where cell damage can occur?
Yeah. So, this oxidative stress conversation, or these free radicals, are, people talk about them all the time, like how bad they are, especially in the, because in the Western medical world, they just kind of don't even acknowledge that they're there sometimes. But in the holistic world, they're seen as this negative thing sometimes, because when they do get out of balance, they create this issue, right? This issue of damage. However, free radicals are incredibly important. They wouldn't be there if they weren't. And so they do a lot of different things. They act as signaling molecules to like signal like how satiated we are, which the wrong types of fuel types in the mitochondria cannot create that oxidative stress, which then never triggers satiety. So you keep eating. or free radicals actually produce light signals, and they also, there's even evidence that they they have this ability to have like quantum entanglement. So the fact that an electron was bound to a molecule at one point, and then that electron is left and becomes a free radical, that free radical and the electron are still quantumly entangled. And so if that electron ends up somewhere in the brain and that molecule is still somewhere in the liver, they can kind of communicate and see what's going on in the rest of the body. And that links into something like coherence. But it just goes to show that these free radicals are important things. Now, just like you said, there's supposed to be kind of this balance, just like anything else. Vitamin A is a very good thing. Get too much of it, it can cause an issue. I mean, any nutrient can be that way. So if we get too many of these free radicals, the issue is that the body has to, I guess, mitigate them to an extent, because they're supposed to have this amount of antioxidants in the body that your body creates, that when we get the process of passing those electrons down the electron transport chain to make water and heat and ATP and everything in the end, we also get this free radical, which also does things. But if we're making too many of those, or we get too many things in our body that can act like free radicals, or too many things in our body that can create free radicals from creating damage, then we can get this state of what's called oxidative stress, where we get these reactive oxygen species, these free radicals that are going around. And I tell my clients and patients, it's like the Looney Tunes Tasmanian devil. It's going around like crazy, and because it wants to find a pair, an electron pair, because it doesn't like to not be paired. It feels unstable. And so it will find that pair wherever it can find it, including steal it from a tissue or from fourth phase water, because that's very electronegative, has lots of negative ions to donate. And so if we have this high amount of oxidative stress, it can start stealing electrons from places, and that can cause damage. It can cause damage to mitochondria. It can cause damage to the lining of the artery. It can cause damage to pretty much anywhere that it's in contact with. And so there was this thought at one point that we could mitigate oxidative stress by taking antioxidants. And so you could put something in a petri dish, some sort of free radical, and you could put these antioxidants on there, and it would take care of it. And you're like, oh, this must work in the body. However, when you do a study like that, it seems to work that way. But when you actually do clinical trials and put it in someone's body, it doesn't seem to reduce oxidative stress. These external antioxidants, all these superfood type things that people talk about. Whereas the real way to mitigate oxidative stress is to stop the process of making those excessive free radicals by increasing mitochondrial function or creating healthy mitochondrial function, and then encouraging your body to make internal antioxidants, so endogenous antioxidants. And so how we do that, how we make sure that our mitochondria are functioning properly is the right light environment, getting in contact with the earth, being metabolically healthy, so having a very efficient fuel source, so more fatty acids and ketones rather than processed carbohydrates or just glucose all the time. And then increasing the internal antioxidant production is giving your body the right kind of tools to do that. So that would be the right amino acids. So that's why collagen protein is pretty important, because it has the types of amino acids that your body builds those internal antioxidants from, but also things like sulfur, and even just liver itself, like eating liver or taking liver supplements, like those types of things are all very helpful in increasing the production of internal antioxidants. And so that's kind of how we do that. We create that balance.
Yeah, you mentioned like so many good things right there that I kind of want to dive into a little bit. But yeah, I think that frame of, thought is pretty, I don't know. It's for me, it's wild how little people are talking about these things, because when you look into the papers and the research, and it's like, yeah, melatonin is like a 10x more potent, free radical scavenger than vitamin C, and, has no pro-oxidant, traits as well. And, it's the composer of our mitochondria. And that goes back to the circadian rhythms, being so important that you're talking about. And, no one's talking about this, and everyone, even in the functional space, even in the biohacker space, they all just, have supplements and things like that. but foundationally, it seems like our body has figured all this out. We just need to tap into it. So, something you also said that maybe I want to ask about is like diet and fatty acids being more efficient from like a mitochondrial perspective, because this is something that, and I don't want to talk about diet too much, but this is something that for maybe 4 years, it's like you heard this saying that ketones are more efficient fuel source. Okay, but nobody tells you like why or how. And recently I kind of went down this rabbit hole, and it's like, oh, like ketones actually upregulate like all the respiratory proteins in our mitochondria, like literally all of them. And like the mitochondria will change shape and be humming at a certain frequency, right, to be burning fat. Is that kind of like the essence of why fat is like a more optimal fuel? Or could you maybe shed some light better on that than what I just did, and how people should think about that, I guess? And of course, you mentioned DHA earlier as well. Like, is that something people really need to be thinking about optimizing in their diet?
Yeah. So with DHA, it's what you want to be building your body with, like your cells with, for the most part. And so like, there'll be some sources where we have like more omega-6s, but those like are only in small amounts, like what would naturally come in a steak or whatever. But DHA is an EPA, but DHA is the one that really allows us to use light. You want to be building your body with that. Like, we are animals, we need animal fats. We don't need the plant fats. We can use those, but they don't create optimal physiology for us. And then, as far as like a fuel source. So the main reason that ketones and fatty acids are more efficient is because they're non-fermentable fuel sources. So if your body's trying to make energy and it wants to use oxygen to do that, that's always the more efficient way to do it. You're going to get way more production of fourth phase water, of heat, and of ATP when you're using oxidative phosphorylation. Your body's using oxygen to break the chemical bonds in food, to harvest electrons and pass them down the electron transport chain. And so there's another way that you can also get energy, and that is fermentation or glycolysis. But that can only use glucose. And so glucose is just a much more inefficient. When we look at what it creates at the end as far as ATP, it creates much less ATP in the end. So using glucose for fuel is going to create more free radicals, which there's evidence, especially in skeletal muscle, that using glucose creates more free radicals. So it kind of pushes us closer to that potential state of oxidative stress, but also that it makes less ATP. So if you're making less ATP, you got to burn more glucose to get enough ATP. So that's what we see in cancer. So cancer cells move over from oxidative phosphorylation because the mitochondria are so damaged and the cell's not functioning, that they revert over to fermentation of that glucose. And so that's why you can, take radioactive glucose and do a DEXA scan. You can pick up where cancer is, because it's using so much glucose, trying to make enough ATP to stay alive. So if we use more fatty acids, or we encourage our body to use more fatty acids and make ketones and use those as well, we stay away from fermentation. Because those are fuels that we just can't ferment. We have to use oxygen. We have to have intact, healthy mitochondria to do that, which is all this other stuff we're talking about, the light and the grounding, and those types of things. So incredibly important, but also people are going to feel it as well. They're going to feel the difference in energy production and the efficiency in their health and just how they feel in general.
And I just want to clarify one thing, right? It's so that should be kind of thought of as like our foundational, like baseline energy production, right? And I guess it's like, I think about it from an athletic perspective, that we're burning fat as fuel until you get into this like glycolytic threshold. So to me, it's like, maybe that's when, most people, or, people should be tapping into like glycolysis. Whereas now the average member of society who's, chronic disease is really prevalent, is kind of just at that stage, all the time. Is that like a good way to think about it?
Yeah. So at some point, like that's why we have glycogen storage in like the liver and in the muscles, because at some point we're going to have to convert over to using a faster fuel source. And that's okay to do in the short term, right? Which is why, if I was going to have carbohydrates, it would be while I was doing this crazy amount of exercise, because that's when my body's going to use it right away. However, food and those processes we just all talked about are only a third of the way our body gets energy. So the other 2/3 is from the environment. So yeah, it's important to remember that too, because electrons come from different places, and not just the chemical bonds in food. And so we can really help out that mitochondrial efficiency by getting energy from other areas and not being so dependent on the food.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of Tristan's actually, his statement there kind of piggybacks off of sort of what I was going to ask, and mine's a little bit broader, but same sort of topic. Then I'll kind of drop the food thing for now, because I want to kind of get in the other stuff. But the way I've been thinking of diet recently, and me and Tristan talk about this a lot in the podcast, is sort of in a cyclical nature with seasonal eating and eating, available things in your environment and stuff like that. So would there be like a benefit? Because I think about, like, sure, the average American's pretty sedentary, doesn't necessarily go to the gym all the time, maybe works a desk job 9 to 5, stuff like that. Would that person benefit from being in that sort of ketosis state of burning, like the predominant amount of the time throughout the year? Or is there still benefit to cycling in and out, maybe with the season? So maybe eating more carbohydrates that are local to you in the summer, and then sort of going back into that through the winter? Or would that still be detrimental? I would say it's kind of context dependent, so it's kind of a open question. But I just wondered if you've thought about that seasonality aspect to carbs and burning more glucose for energy and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, there's situations where someone needs to be in ketosis, some epilepsy and things like that. There's been benefit that those people, if they get out of ketosis, that their symptoms come back. So it can be dependent on that kind of thing. However, I'm not dogmatic about any certain way of eating. I think that you should definitely eat in a way that creates metabolic health. And I think seasonality is very important because of light, getting back to light. So, if you're eating food that was grown in a different light environment than the one that your body is currently in, it can create confusion in the lining of the gut. And we have, evidence for that. And so, eating foods out of season or eating foods that have been shipped all over the world can create issues. So I think that it's completely understandable and natural for our physiology to go back and forth between burning glucose and fatty acids. That's why it can do it. That was preserved evolutionarily because that's what happened year in and year out. And so, I think that there's something to be said for that as far as getting, energy from food in different ways. Our bodies are just adaptive based on what was available in the season. And so, but I think that it's important to pay attention to be conscious of what's actually local and in season in your environment. It's not like, okay, fruit's in season because it's summer, but I live in Canada and I'm going to eat a pineapple. That's still not local and never will be. So it depends on that type of stuff. Really think about what grows in your natural environment and how you can get it locally, like farmers markets and things like that. Because I think that's incredibly important, not just for metabolism, like we were kind of talking about, but also because the light that's stored in the chemical bonds and how that is metabolized in the body and what signal that gives your body internally. So we're getting signals externally from the light from the sun, but we can get light signals from the food once it's in our gut, because the bacteria in our gut can't absorb it. They don't have DHA, so they don't use the light. So it gets projected right onto the lining of the gut, and that's important to take into consideration too.
Yeah, and we sort of had that discussion, me and Tristan, yesterday in our live, talking about eating locally also supports local businesses, local farmers, and that's sort of all about decentralization. So, Tristan, you had a thought? Or no, never mind.
Yeah. I was just curious. I hear this like 1/3, 2/3 from food, from the environment thing. Obviously, it's pretty heavily stated in the quantum health space. I think I just personally, I'm curious because I've never found like a good research article explaining this. And obviously, most people listening to this think about the energy from like a caloric perspective. But, if you know anything about how calories are measured, it's just measuring like heat that's being burned through that process of ATP. So I'm curious, and I want to work in things like grounding where you can absorb electrons. Like, is this a measure of inputs and then ATP created? Is this like a measure of electrons? exactly. Because, light, for example, can obviously improve mitochondrial efficiency, and, that's absorbed either by like cytochrome C oxidase or metabolic water. So it gets pretty complex, like really fast. So I'm curious if you could explain to people exactly where that like 2/3 is coming from like a quantifiable perspective, and then how things like grounding play into that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't remember exactly what they measured, but I know that it's based on electrons,
Okay.
or at least energy created from electrons, because I've seen some things that tell me that it may not directly be electrons traveling through something, and that, there's within like the physics world, there's speculation as to whether electrons are traveling through an electrical wire to provide energy to your house. It's more about there's electrons along the wire, and when energy comes through them, it vibrates them back and forth in their space, and that's what creates an electric field that provides the energy. And so, that could be happening on the collagen fibers in our fascia, that the electrons are moving back and forth, and that's what's creating it. And things like putting your feet directly on the earth are the energy source. The electromagnetic energy from the earth is what's creating that vibration that creates the energy, or the photon energy from the light is what's creating that vibration and creating the energy source. And so, I guess you could make an argument that maybe it's the electromagnetic field generation that's creating the energy. But as far as like the 2/3, 1/3, it's all about, yes, I guess in the end where we get that, and it's not just ATP, because people think that the ATP is what's driving all of our cellular processes, like the energy currency. But to me, ATP is really just unfolding proteins, so that we can maintain those cellular processes. But it's all about that, I guess, that production of the ATP, but also the water, also the heat, infrared light, because your mitochondria are making their own light, and also and the free radicals. And so I guess it's the measurement of those things, and so I guess we can only get so much of those things from food, because the breakdown of the chemical bonds in food is a certain set of pathways. It's the Krebs cycle and all that stuff, so an electron transport chain, but the electron transport chain can't get energy from somewhere else. And I have a question too, and I guess my answer is going to be that I don't know exactly, but because I've read a lot of different things, and I don't know exactly which one it is, but it doesn't really matter, because the things that create the efficiency of it are the same. But I wonder too, like, if we've just seen electrons on the electron transport chain under electron microscope, but we never really seen them traveling and jumping. Maybe we're just seeing them shake, move back and forth, and we call that tunneling. But that's creating energy. That is, again, in all those complexes within the electron transport chain, that is making different things. Like complex 4, it's making the water, and the free radical. In complex 5, it's making the. But it's all about the charges. It's all about creating this electricity, pretty much, which is the same thing we see in electrical wires. It's bringing electricity to their house. We create that energy field, electricity field, and we get energy. And so, I think the most, and I do know where the study is where it's quoted from, but I have to go find it, and I can get it to you.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Because I'm not asking this to be provocative. Like I'm
no.
Curious, because I think
Yeah.
the message is, think about it in terms of electrons. Like electrons
Right.
are the input to our mitochondria to create energy, right? So people think it's calories, it's glucose, or it's fat. No, it's electrons, and you can get that from things other than food. That's how I think about it.
And the thing is that when we don't get them from anywhere else but food, we end up getting, quote unquote, excess calories, right? We get too much of these things. And so, but the real reason that we get, people think, oh, excess calories is weight gain. And to me, that's not weight gain. Weight gain is literally lost energy. Because I don't know a overweight person that's just busting full of energy because they have so much of it. It's because when their electron transport chain is not efficient at either shifting electrons back and forth or actually passing them down, tunneling them, and they get lost, then that's just energy that flows out into the body that has to be dealt with, has to be stored. So the body packages that up and stores it places, because our mitochondria just cannot efficiently handle the amount of quote unquote energy that's coming through the system. And so the body stores it peripherally, right?
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
been my mindset shift with things like obesity. Is like it's actually thinking about it as like a disease of insufficiency rather than excess, which is the modern paradigm, and sells more Ozempic or whatever the drug is, and all that all that exciting stuff. But I want to kind of dive into this grounding stuff more, and maybe this may be like getting a little bit out of your wheelhouse a little bit, but I think it'd be kind of a fun discussion because we're talking a lot about energy transfer, electrons, creating fields of energy. And this is something that Tristan and I have like kind of dived into, or he's sort of spoon fed me, I suppose. These sort of interferences with creating energy and things like NEMF, and sort of how do those things interfere with our body's ability to make energy, and can practicing these things in an environment that is not necessarily ideal, like say living in a city, can they still be beneficial as somewhat of a buffer? I don't know. Obviously, it's sort of like that, the idea of the toxic bucket of how full is your bucket and how fast can you empty it. But sort of like how much of these activities can exchange that. Maybe we can kind of talk about some of that stuff, because I find that's my sort of my hole I'm in right now. It's like trying to figure out how to counterbalance all those things. And final on to that is like, people will ask you, and I'm sure you get these messages all the time because it happens to me, and I'm comments in Tristan's tweets is like, how much of blank do I need to get benefit? It's like, how much sun do I need to get, how much grounding? They want like a minute number. And so I don't know if that's entirely quantifiable, but I'd sort of love your thoughts on those things as well. I know that was a lot, but I just had to get it out.
Yeah. And I'll answer that one first. And what I tell people when they ask me that, is that we've been so programmed to need a prescription, to need to do this and you will get better, or do this and it will fix your problem, right? And so people say, well, what do I have to do? What's the minimum I have to do to fix my problem? It's just like any amount is going to be better than none, right? So do it as much as you can. Like we're talking about grounding. Do as much as you can. Put your feet barefoot on the earth as much as you can. If you're doing something and you can do it outside with the feet barefoot on the earth, go do it then. Like if I'm making food in the kitchen, I don't sit down at the table and eat it. I go outside and put my feet on the ground and eat it. Just like anything you can do. If I'm reading a book, I'm trying to be out there, So yeah, 3 minutes is better than no minutes each day, so just do it as much as you can and your body is going to get better. Same with sunlight. Be smart about it. Like, don't burn, but you're going to be less likely to burn if you get different amounts of like the different wavelengths and colors of temperatures of light throughout the day. Your body's gonna be able to soak in more of that without burning. So yeah, and then as far as grounding goes, this is where I actually learned and came across the whole idea of, I don't know if electrons are traveling through the collagen and the fascia in my body, or if they're just oscillating electrons back and forth, creating an electric field, electromagnetic field. But it doesn't matter because we're getting energy either way. But yeah, when you put yourself in contact with an energy source, something with an electromagnetic field like the Earth, that has these electrons in it because of lightning striking the Earth, we know that when two conductive surfaces are put up against each other, that the surface with the higher charge is going to flow. It's going to flow energy into the one with the lower charge, since the Earth's always going to have more charge than I am because it's ginormous and I'm not. Then it's going to flow into me or to living things. And so it's exactly what we see when you put your feet on the Earth. Now, the question is, what does that do for us? One thing that it does is that we can provide ourselves electrons, like we talked about, and make energy in the form of ATP and other things that mitochondria create by using those electrons to do that stuff. But also, it's gonna, I talked about how infrared light structures water, but also doing this type of thing, putting yourself into these compatible electromagnetic fields and soaking up energy from the Earth is also going to structure water in your bodies, or it's going to energize the water so that when it gets next to hydrophilic surfaces, it will structure itself. And so one of the biggest things that this does for heart health is it structures water onto the lining of the artery, but also onto the elements of blood. And so there's actually a few different studies that show that grounding, and some of them were in like an artificial setting, they were plugged into the wall and they were grounding that way rather than feet directly on the Earth. plugged into the grounding wire, but it will actually increase what's called zeta potential around the red blood cells, around lipoproteins as well, around blood elements. And the reason this is important is because that serves as this kind of protective layer, this structured water around those elements serves as a protective layer that keeps things from clumping up. We talk about like, red blood cell clumping, like when you get it's called a Rouleau formation. If you get a erythrocyte sedimentation rate test, you can look at those types of things. But that's a signal of decreased inflammation. And that's something that grounding has been shown to significantly decreases inflammation. But the other important thing about having things evenly spaced from each other, or everybody respecting their own space within the bloodstream, is clotting. It's preventing clotting, right? Because if things are not moving well, things are getting stagnant, then that just perpetuates or encourages the state of clotting if we're in an inflamed state. And the other thing is that not only does that spacing help prevent that, but also the increase of structured water on the lining of the artery creates a battery situation because of how it forms that literally creates blood flow, which is what Gerald Pollack has shown over and over again in his lab, is that when you do this, it creates flow. And so I have learned over the years that so much is about flow of fluid in the body. If the body is people can think about like a puddle. If there's a puddle and it's just sitting there and it's not, evaporating, then the puddle gets dirty, then maybe bacteria, some debris get into it, whatever. But if you look at a river, it's always flowing. And there's very little, if any, spots where things get backed up and it looks dirty and gross because there's flow. And that's what we need to create in our bodies. But unfortunately, we put ourselves in the wrong environments to do that. Lots of people do, and we get this stagnant flow. So grounding gives your the water in your blood energy to create this flow and prevent this stagnant or bunching up of things in the blood that can create issues.
Are you interested in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished bison meat? I'm excited to be a partner with Falls Family Ranches. Based in Wyoming, Falls Family Ranches is raising high-quality bison meat the way nature intended. As a native large ruminant of North America, bison is one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can consume. If you're interested in trying out their bison boxes, use code Tristan, Tristan, 10 for 10% off your first order.
Super fascinating stuff. I mean, I haven't really gotten, maybe we can even talk about a little bit about water, because we haven't talked about that too much on the podcast, and sort of the importance of that. Tristan, do you have something you wanted to say really quick?
No, I think it's just like so fascinating. And I think about it all as, flow, whether that be flow of, water, flow of charge, like flow of communication. Like, I think it all comes down to the signal and the flows being interrupted. Mm-hmm. Like, and if signals are interrupted or the flow of water, electrons, like that's when, you're in this sympathetic state of not being able to function in an optimal way. So I think that's important. And it's just good to highlight this because I think grounding, it's interesting to think about like, how disconnected we are and how much that's actually affecting our health. Because like we used to just be like 100% like connected like all the time. And even if you go outside for like, 15, 30 minutes a day, like, that's better than nothing. But like, we used to it just used to be 100% like full tilt. Like we were recharging, all the time. So I'm curious, what you do or what you think is like an optimal way. Do you, subscribe to like grounding shoes and grounding sheets and beds and things like that? Or do you just try and get out as much as possible? Kind of actionable steps thing.
Yeah, I just try and get out as much as possible. I don't have any the shoes or sheets. Not to say that I won't at some point in my life, because it really, like what I tell people to do is all dependent on their current state of health. If they're really sick, it's like, okay, let's think about some sheets, some shoes. Let's do it as often as we can, right? Because what you're doing, you need like a higher dose than maybe other people do. And I hope that the things I'm doing now that are in smaller amounts are preventing me from getting to that state where I need the higher amounts later on, or increasing the amount of time I'll need before I have to get to that point. I think that's kind of individual based on the person about how far I would go. Now, if you just got the money and the resources and you just want to create optimization, then yeah, go for it. I think you could do grounding as much as you want, as many ways as you want. There is something to be said for like, as far as indoor grounding and like dirty electricity in the house and things that you want to make sure that you mitigate that kind of stuff. And I mean, it could just be as easy as, running a copper wire into the yard and through a window rather than relying on your grounding wire or something. But yeah, so the level at which you do those things and the extreme in which you go to, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily consider it extreme, but you can call it that, is dependent on your state of health and what level of health you want to get to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Ryan, you want to ask about water?
Yeah, I mean, and just building off that last point is like, you made such a good point about, I think part of the job that I would love to accomplish here is stating simply that it's so much of what we talk about is context dependent as far as like amounts and all these things. It's hard to give, like you said, everyone's looking for a prescription, or actually the easy way out is what people are looking for most of the time, like the bare minimum to get the max benefit, which, I'm all for efficiency and stuff like that, but some of the things you can't quantify on that sort of basis. So there's always that context dependent thing. And I've always been kind of interested in the indoor, in the grounding sheets and the plug-in things, because I always wonder, like, and maybe this is just a quick question, but like when you plug things in like that, are you actually getting a benefit, or are you just getting more dirty electricity? Because I think about that sometimes when you're plugging into the grid, like, are you just getting that electricity versus like what you actually want to get from the Earth's field? Because I've wondered about that, because there's so many products out there. I mean, I'm wearing one of them right now. So it's like how much of the gadgets should we worry about, or should we really focus on the basics, which is generally what I think is like, just go outside as much as you can, because in that case, you at least know you're getting something beneficial and you're not just throwing money at something. But hey, there's also placebo. So,
well, it's also free.
It's also free. That's
right.
the thing.
Most people can do that.
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it comes down to me, it's like mitochondrial, function, right? It's like you can handle, if your mitochondria are like optimally functioning, like you can handle things better. And if, like Steve was saying, if you're in this state, so I was just gonna say, what do you think are the biggest detriments to mitochondrial dysfunction? And Ryan kind of alluded to a few of them, but I'm curious how you think about that, and maybe what are the the other things that we haven't mentioned that are also really impactful to helping improve that function, because I know there are a few others probably.
Yeah. Well, one of the big ones that we've talked about, but not in the context of mitochondria, is structured water. So the amount, or the health of the structured water in your cells and in your mitochondria definitely plays a role in how well your mitochondria can make those end products, make the structured water, make the free radicals, make the ATP, whatever it needs to do, because the state of the water is really important for how far apart those complexes in the electron transport chain are. So if your water is in a different state that's not, that's more or less dense than it should be, that can create a situation where we get, again, loss of that electron flow. So that loss can, create less efficiency, but then it also can create excess or wasted energy. So fourth phase water in the context of mitochondria is really important. So if you want to shrink those mitochondria, like things like, the sunlight and the grounding, but also cold exposure, really important, or really helpful, I should say, in shrinking the space between those complexes in the electron transport chain. And then some of the big interferences with mitochondrial health. So, one reason we talked a lot about mitochondria, but the reason it's so important for the heart is because the heart's one of the tissues with the highest amount of mitochondria. It's like 5,000 per cell, which is insane. And so, but it makes sense. It needs a lot of function, it needs a lot of energy because it's always contracting, never stops their whole life. But also, it gives it the highest electromagnetic field because the mitochondria are producing an electromagnetic signal, and that is creating a field, which is why the heart has the biggest one, which allows it to literally affect every cell in the body. It's the only electromagnetic field that can touch every cell in the body. So when we're talking about getting everything on the same page as far as communication, and not interfering with that signal by other electromagnetic fields coming in and affecting those mitochondria, then it's really important for the heart and creating coherence in the body. So electromagnetic fields, I think, are a huge issue as far as something that can throw off mitochondrial function through affecting the electromagnetic field. And then also I'd say light, wrong types of light, I should say, at the wrong times will definitely kind of zap your mitochondria. Again, because we're supposed to be taking in that light and creating structured water, creating energy, all these things that enhance the function of the mitochondria. So if we're doing things that aren't doing that, because it's almost like the autonomic nervous system. You're supposed to get a balanced signal between stress and non-stress signal. It's never one or the other. It's the same with light. It's we're never supposed to get one wavelength or color temperature of light at a time. It always comes in multiple wavelengths and color temperatures, and that's kind of like this moderation type thing, But and so when we get the blue light at the wrong times, not only does it disrupt circadian rhythm and all that stuff and suppress melatonin, but it also creates inefficient mitochondria. It interferes with the ability of those to be able to pass down the electrons through the electron transport chain. So light is incredibly important. I actually just got off a call with a client not too long ago where I was trying to harp on this, and I was like, the light is what's literally telling your body what to do. Like, your body's responding the way it is right now because you're getting the wrong light environment. It was just a hard concept for them. It's incredibly important. And then I'd say just like, going kind of back to the cold exposure, I think one of the other things, main disruptors of things, is that I guess convenience. Like, we're trying to make everything so easy. We control our temperature environment, we control the light environment, so everything's always the same brightness and stuff. We literally can try and control everything to make it convenient, when in reality, we don't want to live like harsh lives. We don't have to do that this day and age, but we also need to recognize the benefit of doing hard things and the resilience that gives your body, because it upregulates all these mechanisms that keep you healthy. And so if we never use those, it's like never using your muscles. It's just going to kind of waste away. If we never use those mechanisms that help your body deal with that small stress, that hormetic stress, whatever you want to call it, then we're creating dysfunction. We're creating weak things, whether that's weak mitochondria down to the cellular level, whether it's weak muscles, whether it's, weak whatever. So I think that there's something to be said for that, creating that resilience to doing hard things and stop trying to make everything so convenient all the time.
No, that's such a great point. We talk about that actually quite a bit, about like sort of convenience culture and just the day and age that we live in. We live in such an amazing time to be a human, I think, and at the same time, such a dangerous time to live. It's like it's sort of like finding that balance, and it's like you said, you don't use it, you lose it. That works on pretty much every cellular level of your body, not just muscle or mind. And so I think that's a really good point of view to have. And I think the difficulty is we live in a time now where we have to go out of our way to create healthy stress, because I think there's this negative connotation with stress being only negative, when, like you said, things like cold exposure, sun. I mean, cold exposure is not an exciting, fun, calm time. There's definitely ways to calm it down. But I was jumping in the river with Tristan maybe like a week and a half ago, and I realized how bad my resilience is even now, because I just got in there and I could not handle hardly any of it. But there's sort of a benefit of hormetic stress. And I think what happens in a diseased state is your body's resilience is even worse than, say, the average person who doesn't have, say, an autoimmune disease or neuropathy or something of that nature. And so there's a benefit still to, I think, I actually love your opinion on this, is sort of like when you're in that diseased state, yes, you may not be able to handle the same level of hormetic stress as a healthy individual, but is it still beneficial to practice some level of getting into sympathetic and then coming back into parasympathetic? Because I struggle with that myself, and having people reach out to me, and I'm sure you deal with this with clients, because a lot of people that I think are sick are stuck in that stressed state. And so we're working on bringing them down. But at some point, there's going to be a benefit to sort of giving them a bit of hormetic stress, because you want them to be resilient. You don't want them to just be basically a glob of mush. So where's that balance? And of course, it's individual, but are there benefits to practicing things like cold exposure when you are still in a stressed state? Or is that something that you wait for and maybe focus on things like heat, like infrared sauna, and getting your sunlight in and stuff like that to build up?
Yeah, I think, well, you meet the client where they are. You know, if the sunlight is the hermetic stress they get, and that's the free thing that they can do, then that's great. But you know, cold exposure can start with just dunking your face in an ice bath, you know, and then it can work up to, you know, cold shower for 30 seconds, then a minute, then 2 minutes, and then, you know, then just full submersion in cold water, and then ice water. You know, it can work up to those types of things, depending on you know, your tolerance and what your body can handle. But it's the same with diet. You know, it's just like if you can't like wake up and eat like I do today, then you could at least change when you eat, you know, and do the window earlier in the day, and then we'll work on what you eat later. And there's just so many different steps you could take, you know, because lots of times I think people hear our podcasts like these, or they read books and things like that, and they're just like, man, I got to go all or nothing. And it's like, well, no, you can start somewhere. Like I didn't just wake up yesterday or one day and just do what I do today. It's always been this evolving process and gotten better and better as I learned more and more, and made my life, or made it able to do those. Or just like, even with the light stuff, it's like some people are just not going to get up in the morning and see the sunrise. They're just not going to do it because either they don't want to, or they just don't even have the capacity. They can't even think about doing that today. So, okay, we'll just buy some blue blocking glasses and block blue light at night. Let's start there, you know, and it just kind of work things up to it. But there's always somewhere you can start. There's always something you can do. So never use, oh, I'm too sick to do anything, or I just don't feel like doing anything, because there's always a place you can start, even if it's just little things, and it takes you a long time to get where you want to be. There's always going to be a benefit in doing these things. You just got to do it in a way that that enhances your success, rather than overwhelms you, and, you know, makes you fall back down to where you were in the beginning, you know?
No, totally agree. And one thing, going back to structured water, because you kind of mentioned it with seeing sunrise and stuff like that, and having those times of the day being ideal for helping your body make structured water. There's a lot of talk about like red light devices, like I have one. Is there still a benefit to using something like that in the morning and evening if you can't get out into the sun for creating structured water? Obviously, the sun, you're never going to beat the sun because it has it all. But is there still benefit for using those devices at those times to help your body make structured water? And is it true that like you make more structured water in the morning during that infrared wavelength versus the evening, or is it kind of the even? I've heard like a couple different things on that.
I think that you make more, but I don't think it's necessarily because of light. I think it's because of metabolism, which is higher in the morning. So your mitochondria are making structured water. So your cortisol spikes, everything gets going, your metabolism gets going in the morning. So you're making more structured water. And if you expose yourself to infrared, then I think that's a good thing. It's probably why we might see more in the morning. But yeah, I do. If I do my red light exposure, like my little hacks, then I do them. I try to do them in the appropriate time when the infrared's high. Now, infrared's going to be there all day long. It's just that you're going to have blue light there too in the midday, and green light and things like that. But yeah, so I try and sync that up, because I think my body's evolutionarily in tune to use it better at those times. So when I do sauna, I do it in the morning before I even leave. Like if I go out and I see the sunrise for the light in my eyes, but then I'll open the window and sit in the sauna right by the window. So I'm getting the light in my eyes and I'm getting a higher infrared dose, because I also like to get hot doing that and have that stress too. So yeah, I mean, I try and sync it up with what would make sense naturally, you know.
What is I've actually wondered about this, and I've had questions, and I'll let Tristan jump in after this, but what is the difference between, say, using like a red light therapy device versus jumping in the infrared sauna? Are there differences in wavelengths, or are they virtually the same thing? Because I have both, but I've had people ask me like, oh, is this different than using the light? Is there a benefit to doing both, or does it matter? Is it interchangeable? I've just sort of wondered that myself.
I think both might be a little overkill. Not to say that it's harmful to do both, but I think that it might be a little overkill. You need one or the other. I mean, the difference is that red light is on the visible spectrum. It's visible red light. Infrared is on the non-visible spectrum. So you're not going to see it. You're just going to feel the heat. The sun has both, but I think that doing both maybe overkill. Infrared is the most absorbed by water, and it's going to have mitochondrial benefits, same as red light will. I'm not saying any is better than the other. If all you can afford is a small red light panel, then that's what you can do. I don't have a red light panel. I think that it'd be a little, but I do use red light panels in my clinic for decompression patients and trying to build up and hydrate their collagen again, because I can have it there in the clinic and they can stay in there. But yeah, so that's the difference. I think as far as like what it does to the body is that water absorbs infrared a bit more.
Gotcha. Okay, that's kind of what I was wondering, because I don't use both in the same day usually, anyways, but I have both, and I was just curious if there was actually a huge difference. But that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, there's even differences. People think in near and far infrared, and the ability to penetrate and what effects it may have. Like near infrared, more cellular mitochondrial health. Far infrared, more like pulling toxins out. I think that the heat is also important too. I mean, heat. That's why the Finnish saunas are so beneficial too. Even there's no infrared, it's just creating heat, because it kind of melts the gels, melts the fourth phase water, which sometimes things can get stuck in there. So it's what a fever does. If you have a fever, you're melting the gels a little bit so your body can push out the things that get stuck, and then it forms new healthy structured water without things interfering with it. Once that happens, it's kind of this cleansing of the structured water. That's why a natural process of cleansing when you're sick is a fever.
What are your thoughts on, the water that we actually consume, that we drink? Like, is that playing a factor into, structured water, in terms of what we produce? Assuming not, but how about the water that the average person drinks and is just exposed to via, cleaning and showering and things like that?
Yeah, I know people that tell me, or that say, you've got to get structured water. You got to drink structured water. And that's beneficial, you could definitely do that, drink water in its more coherent state. And however, for the reality for a lot of people is that they're never going to be able to buy devices that do that or whatever. And so, but they've got a lot of water in themselves already that they can expose their bodies to those things, and create the ability of your mitochondria and the water in your body to be energized so they can structure itself. But I think more importantly, when it comes to water, is make sure it's not full of toxins, because those are going to interfere with the structuring of water and the function of water, and they're going to increase oxidative stress and things like that when they get in the body. And then also mineralize the water. Make sure your water has minerals, because without those minerals, it can't do what it's supposed to do. It can't truly hydrate you without the minerals, because the hydrated minerals are what actually go into the cells and bring water molecules in there, and then the structuring of it is based on other things like the light and stuff. But yeah, at the very least, the least minerals or the least toxins as possible, and make sure it's mineralized. And then if you want to have a structuring water device, I think is awesome, and that people can do that. But you could also focus on putting your body in environments that structure the water as well.
So basically, just don't drink dead water.
Yeah.
Well, I think it comes back to like electrolytes. Like, people know this word because of Gatorade, right? Like electrolytes. Like what does that even mean? And it goes back to actually electricity, right? Like in the cells, like you need these, minerals that are like ions for us to, be able to communicate intracellularly. And I think what you're talking about, like you can get really deep down the collagen, like water, fascia rabbit hole of like intracellular communication. And that stuff is so cool. But that kind of ties into my next question is like, we're talking a lot about very complex topics. The average person doesn't even know like about cellular respiration or, any of this stuff. And even the wavelengths of light, right? Like it's very like physics based in nature. And some people have, STEM backgrounds, some people don't. And we've talked about, some easy takeaways, getting, sunlight, getting connected to the earth, like eating real food, maybe thinking about like low carb and avoiding, artificial light and non-native EMFs. But, how do you think we get more people on board with this? Like, where do you see the gap being bridged? And, working with clients, like, are they receptive to this? Or, how do you kind of approach, educating and getting people into a healing state with these modalities that are simple takeaways, but complex, in the layers below them?
Yeah. I'm going to say one thing first before I answer that, because you made me think of it when you said electrolytes are electricity and everything. So that's actually one way that the heart communicates information to the rest of the body, because that's why you can pick up an electrocardiogram at someone's feet, because the electrical signals from the heart and the electromagnetic field from the heart are being communicated electrically through the electrically conductive, blood, which is full of electrolytes. That's why, when lightning strikes the ocean, electricity goes off everywhere, because there's all these, that's how it conducts it. Right. And so that's just an interesting thing. It's one of, like, maintaining your electrolyte balance is really important for that communication of information from the heart to create that coherence. And then I think that, I think sometimes people get bogged down in, like, all the different things they're quote unquote supposed to do to achieve health. They start getting into the health. They start listening to all these people, and they just feel like their list is like 18 pages long of all the things they have to do. Right. And it gets overwhelming.
And buy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so sometimes I think that it really helps them to train them, instead of telling them a bunch of things to do and how to do it and just giving them instructions, giving that prescription like people want, like, how long do I have to do this, is giving them more of a philosophy. Because then if they have that philosophy, they can go throughout their life and decide what's best for them or not. They don't have to go by this book that they wrote down all these things and say, oh, is this okay or not? They can decide for themselves. And I think that's way more useful sometimes for some people than just giving them direct instructions. And so the philosophy I like to share with people, just to kind of get them to step back and realize what we're actually doing, is ask themselves what is real, and so, because, we get caught up in these hyper realities, and I talk about this term a lot, which means we just take something, some construct as more real than what's actually real. And, example could be blood work. We look at this blood work and we say, this says I'm healthy, or it says I'm really unhealthy. Right. But I can't tell you how many times I've, looked at blood work in someone and been like, this person should be dead, and they come in there like, I feel great, or vice versa, So it's just like, blood work is this hyper reality. Doesn't mean it's not important. Doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention to it, but it's just this hyper reality, these things. And then, a more easy to understand example is the Weather Channel, right? So, like, you look at the Weather Channel, you see the green blob going across the screen. It says it's raining in these areas. And I can't tell you how many times I've looked at my thing and it says raining. I look outside, it's not raining. Like, that's a hyper reality. We're taking this thing on the Weather Channel that's telling us this is real, and we're not looking at what's really happening in front of us. And so when we step back and we ask ourselves, what should we do for health? We should ask ourselves, what's real? What's real food? What's our real environment? What's real contact with earth? What's real light, not processed light? What are real relationships, not fake relationships, or not virtual relationships, or pseudo relationships, like all my friends on Facebook that I never really talk to. It's like, have real in-person relationships, real social, supportive, loving relationships. But yeah, so ask yourself what's real, and what's not. What's this hyper reality that we've created? And this, I mean, medical research, hyper reality, like we talk about all these different things, even some of the things we talk about here, like, not to throw doubt or confuse people or whatever, but it's just like, these are things based on our understanding, based off medical science that was designed by humans or conducted by humans, So it's these hyper realities. We can go in and we can, because I hope people realize, when I say things like, well, I'm not really sure. I've read lots of different theories as to why this happens. But in the end, it doesn't matter exactly what happens. What matters is that I know that time and time again, I tell people to go get in the sun, eat real food, have real relationships, get real contact with earth, and they feel better. And that's the only true test of time that's going to happen over and over and over again, regardless of all the different theories as to why I think that happens or what's actually happening. The reality is that it happens over and over again, and it's real. It's not just like real treatment, but it's real to them specifically. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about. When you're looking at the package, should I eat this? Well, these aren't real things, it's either steak, which is just one ingredient, steak, or it's all these things with different ingredients. What's more real? And those are the types of battles you got to kind of learn to have with yourself, and you'll learn how to make decisions yourself.
That's such a great perspective to have. I think humans, include like all of us, do such a good job of overcomplicating fundamentals. And at the end of the day, I think so many of these things, that the ideas of like what creates health, so many of them are not only free or close to free, but they're very simple. And I feel like we get lost in the weeds of something needs to be complicated to be right. And I think people often get lost like searching for those things. And one thing I wanted to ask you, this is more of a coaching perspective or working with clients perspective, because you do. How do you keep someone who's maybe not yet seeing the results they want to see in the game for the long haul to develop those results? Because I know I'll have people come to me saying like, oh, I tried this, it didn't work, so I'm just going to eat candy and cookies or whatever because they taste better. And so like, how do you keep someone's mindset in the right place when they're not maybe seeing a turnaround overnight sort of thing?
One thing I encourage some people to do sometimes is make notes of their baseline where they started. How often were you getting whatever symptom? How often was, maybe blood work could be useful in this sense. Like maybe there's something on blood work that they want to correct, but write down baselines of things of where they were, so that when they get to the point, maybe they're still having symptoms and stuff, and they're just like, oh, I'm tired of this because it's not working as well as I would like it to yet. I get them to refer back to, hey, where were you? Look, you've made progress. Look, it is working, so that can be an important thing. It's not something that I kind of formally do with people, but it's just like I can encourage them to make note, maybe even write it down where you were, so you can gauge your progress, because that progress is encouraging, and so, I hesitate to do it with certain testing, because I don't think testing is the end all be all, but it can be a motivator to people to keep it up. But also just getting them to recognize, maybe they are able to do things that they haven't been able to do for a long time, and they don't even realize it. They just, because they're so focused on a certain symptom. So it's kind of like broadening their mind a little bit, and they're broadening their view of health. It's not just this certain symptom that you have that you're trying to get rid of, because you get so narrowly focused on that one symptom when life is way more than just that one symptom. And so really, making them aware of those types of things will keep them on track.
No, that's great. That's why I'm so careful with the way I label things or talk to myself, or all these sort of subliminal messaging that we send to ourselves all the time of like, we are this, I am my symptom, blah, 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 because we get trapped in that mindset of like, this is everything, when there's so much more. That's a great perspective to have. I thank you for coming on. Like, where can people reach out to you, find your book, your other works? So you have so many great resources on your Instagram and stuff like that. Where can people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah, my website is resourceyourhealth.com, and my books and my health consulting are on there. And I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. It's just Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. People can find me there, and I'll be speaking at a few different events this year. So if you want to meet me in person, they can try and go to those. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you again, Stephen, and thank you guys for coming to another episode of Decentralized Radio. See you in the next one.